Thanks for coming, everyone. It's great that you're here. We're going to spend the afternoon talking about emotional skills. My name's Mike Connolly, and I'm a nurse, and I'm also a trainer of communication skills. This is a national initiative designed to help the whole workforce think about how you might listen and respond to people who are distressed. I'm working today with two colleagues, Claire and Julie, both of whom are nurses and both of whom have been trained to provide communication skills. Now, if you come across people who are distressed in your work, then I'm hoping you're going to find that this is a relevant workshop for you. For example, if you're a nurse or a doctor or a physio or an occupational therapist or a pharmacist, then it'll be a normal part of your work to come across people who are concerned or worried or upset or crying or distressed. That's what healthcare is like. If you're an administrator or if you're a secretary, you'll come across people who are upset and worried on the phone. If you're a volunteer, maybe working in a hospital shop or a hospice shop or something like that, you will also come across people who are worried. And therefore, I'm hoping that you will see things that are relevant in this workshop. It will be a reminder for many of you, because these are skills that many of you will have to some or greater extent. But I want you to see if you can learn anything this afternoon, learning from us as trainers, but also learning from each other. And you might teach one another as we go through the workshop. So it matters to spend an afternoon on communication skills. It matters for us and it matters for the people that we support. When people have been trained in communication skills, there is evidence that their communication skills improve, and there is evidence that people with good communication skills experience lower levels of burnout. They also have higher levels of job satisfaction. All of us want to do a good job. And when we come across people who are upset and we know how to respond, we end our working day feeling better about ourselves. And therefore, that helps us cope with the work. It's also helpful for the people that we support. We know from the research that people who are supported by staff who have good communication skills have lower levels of symptoms, they experience lower levels of pain and distress, they need lower levels of medications. So it's good for them and it's good for us. And remember this about communication, that when we get it wrong, it causes great distress, and poor communication is the #1 reason why people complain about health services. Okay, I want you to remember, however, that we don't always listen very well. We might be good listeners some of the time and not so good listeners other times. And this is a slide that just reminds us of the difference between really listening and then actually only half listening because we're trying to say something. And it's hard when we're learning to try to listen, to hold back with all of the things that we want to say. We might want to give advice or reassurance, or we might want to explain things or explain that we've come across some, and all of that noise in our head gets in the way of us properly listening to other people. So listening, unsurprisingly, is about listening. And we're going to take you through listening skills this afternoon, step by step by step. Our job is to help you with the evidence and help you understand what this structure, SAGE and THYME is. And your job is to tell us what you know already and then to see whether what we're explaining to you this afternoon fits, yes or no, into the way you normally listen. We haven't just made this up. We're working from published evidence, and this is about practical skills that are described in the published evidence. You'll see on the right-hand side of this slide a picture of a handout. We're going to give you this. You're very welcome to make notes as we go through the workshop, but we're going to give you halfway through the workshop a pack which has the evidence that helps you understand the skills we're talking about and this SAGE and THYME structure. And I'll go through some of the evidence as we go through the workshop, and you'll be given a list. You've got a list of where in sort of like textbooks and published journals you'll see SAGE and THYME described. Let me talk you through first, however, the way this afternoon's going to work. I'm going to ask you to work in small groups, and we're going to start by, in those 3 groups, thinking about what you know already. You come into this room with a great deal of experience in your work lives or in your personal lives of providing emotional support, and we want to build on that, but start by finding out what you know already. And then the next part of the workshop is a lecture, and in the whole 3 hours, there's about 25 minutes of me working through slides, explaining to you what the policy says, what the research says, explaining to you what SAGE and THYME is. At the end of that lecture, you'll know exactly what SAGE and THYME is. Then we'll put you back into the 3 groups, if you will, to have a think about that. You don't have to like SAGE and THYME, you don't have to agree with SAGE and THYME, it's just there for guidance for you. But we want to know what you think of it, and so we'll ask you what you think of it, and then we'll see how what's in SAGE and THYME fits with what you told us in the first group work session. Then we'll all have a break, get a cup of tea for a quarter of an hour, then we'll come back. And when we come back, I want to work on rehearsals. And by that I mean actually practicing what you might say when you come across someone who's upset or worried. We'll take situations or scenarios from you as the group of learners, and then we will see how SAGE and THYME could be applied to those situations. We'll do the rehearsing. You don't need to feel anxious about us expecting you to perform your communication skills or demonstrate your communication skills. We'll do that. Claire and Julie and I will do that. And there's time actually to do 2 rehearsals this afternoon, and therefore if there is someone in the room that would like to have a go at practicing using SAGE and THYME in the safety of the workshop or in the safety of this classroom, then we can do that. And if nobody wants to do that, don't worry, Claire, Julie and I will demonstrate it to you a second time. Then we'll show you a video, and then after the video you go back into the small groups just before we finish, and we ask you whether you learned anything, and we want you to say to each other what you picked up or what you were reminded of that you already knew. So before we really go too far, let me just talk about some ground rules. We're really pretty strict about mobile phones, I'm afraid. The reason for that is a lot of people check their phones a lot of the time, and it's common to do that even in learning workshops like this, but we would like you not to do that in this one, please. The reason for that is that it's only 3 hours, it's a short workshop, and if you start using your phone, that distracts the learners on either side. So for the sake of your other learners today, please don't get your phones out. If you really must send a text or take a call, please stand up, walk out the room, go and take the call, and then come back in again. But what we'd really rather you did is to put your phone out of reach. So that's mobile phones. Then one discussion at a time, just so that when we're in group discussions, that actually we all listen to one another and we don't have small discussions, sub discussions going on around the room. But we do want everyone to contribute. The people who are normally quiet are often the people who have a lot to say if they're invited in to speak. So I want everybody to give everybody else a chance to speak. Please don't mention real clients or real patients or real colleagues, because there's a risk to breaching their confidentiality and their privacy if you do. So don't use real names, and we will keep to time. We will be out of this room by 4:30 today, I promise. One last thing before we move on. Emotions. This is a workshop about emotions, and therefore you're allowed to be emotional. If, however, you feel so emotional that you need to just step out of the room for a while, you are very welcome to do that. Just do so. We won't come out after you, because we need to stay in here and do the teaching. But if you're outside and you want to come back in again when you've composed yourself, do so. Please come back in. What I would say is, if there are things that are making you feel very upset, try not to discuss them in the small group work session. If you do that, what happens is the other learners then start taking care of you, and you don't do the learning that you actually need to do in that particular group work session. So try, if you can, to hold back with the emotional stuff that's going through your minds in your real lives or maybe in your own work. And now I'm going to show you a video about emotions. It's an American video, but it applies really well to this country as well. It's about emotion, so I'm warning you, it's an emotional video, and we show it you because we think it really articulately describes the range of emotions that exist within healthcare. Have a watch of this video. Okay, I think it takes a bit of courage for health workers to approach and to support people who are upset. You need a certain amount of time and courage to be able to do that, but you also are entitled to some guidance. And today is a workshop that is about helping you with the process of how you support people who are upset. What I'd like us all to do now is to work in 3 small groups. I'll take a group, and Claire will take a group, and Julie will take one. I'm going to allocate you into 3 groups by going around the group 1, 2, 3. The purpose is to put you in small groups so that you get a chance to speak and to have a think together about emotional support. And we've put 2 questions up to guide you with that. The first question is, how can you notice when someone's upset? And the second question is, how do you respond? They're not trick questions. We're just trying to get you thinking about what you know already. With the second one, which is about how you respond, imagine that you've got a toolbox, a little sandwich box, if you like, of skills that you can bring to the situation when you know you're in front of someone who's upset. What's in that box? What skills have you got to bring to this? Okay, so I'm going to go around the group, and then I'd like you to work with my 2 colleagues and myself. So I'll split you up into 3 groups. Okay, thank you everybody for working in groups. I can see that there were a lot of thoughts and a lot of ideas being generated. I can see from the flip charts that you know about noticing concerns, and you also have a lot of insight already into how to respond. I'm going to try now to just walk you step by step through what the research says, and then explain to you what this SAGE and THYME structure is. And And your job is to see how that might apply to what you know already. So I suppose the obvious place to start is that people are upset for obvious reasons. They have worries and concerns, and it's common and it's actually natural to be worried. When you're ill and illness disrupts your life and maybe even threatens your life, it is completely unsurprising that people are worried and upset. Sometimes they get panicky in these situations, and they're with you, and we want you to feel some calm yourself and some confidence about how to support them. The problem is that perhaps only the brave ones will come and tell you that they're frightened or that they're upset. Most people, if the research is to be believed, the research tells us that most people don't really know how they can ask, who they can ask, when they can ask, to talk about the things that they're upset about. And therefore, it needs us, all of us, regardless of our roles, to be quite alert, if you like, to the people who are upset, and to actively give them the opportunity to talk if they wish. So we want you to notice. I want myself to notice as well. We want to notice when people are upset. But we also need, if you like, to bear in mind that some people don't want to talk, or shall I say, some people don't want to talk much, or maybe some people don't want to talk much at the moment. And so we have to be prepared to approach people and therefore notice their distress, but also hold back from pushing them too hard to talk about the things that they're not ready to talk about. Now, of course, we hold back sometimes, not just because we're not sure whether the patients want to talk about stuff. We hold back because we're sort of nervous about opening a can of worms. We're nervous of starting something that we then wish we hadn't started. And when you start to ask people what they're worried about, perhaps they'll start to tell you. And so because we're not sure about opening the can of worms, we tend not to ask the question in the first place. We also literally, genuinely, actually have lots of other things that we can do in our days. And therefore, because we're so busy, it's tempting not to choose to do something that is unpredictable in itself. And then finally, we might feel as though we know how to get into a discussion about emotions and concerns, but we are nervous about how we're going to get out again. So in this workshop, we're going to explain to you how to open a can of worms, how to do so quickly, how to get in, and how to get out again. Okay, so the research tells us that sometimes we get it wrong. We feel brave, we go and approach the person, we start to ask them and start to listen, but then we have a tendency, because of all, if you like, the advice and noise in our own brains, we have a tendency to actually interrupt them, to start giving them advice. We jump in too quickly with that, according to the research. We start to stop the flow of their thoughts because we have a sort of an urge to reach out to them and give them the benefits of our experience. The other thing we have a tendency to do is to concentrate on the physical and practical stuff and not on the emotional stuff. Let me try and explain. You say, tell me what it is you're worried about, and they say, I feel scared. This pain is getting worse. I was in pain last night and I didn't sleep. I don't think I slept much at all last night, and I'm beginning to feel a bit scared about where all this is going. We have a tendency, according to the research, to hear pain and poor sleep and not hear scared and not hear I'm not sure where all this is going, whereas real listening would have noticed 4 concerns there: scared, pain, poor sleep, not sure where all this is heading. And so those, if you like, are some of the behaviors that the researchers tell us that we are likely to slip into if we're not careful. And if we're not careful and we don't think carefully about the way we respond when people are distressed, we might actually just make it worse if we're not careful. We might leave people feeling misunderstood or frustrated that actually we came to try and talk to them and ended up, advising them, and they can feel out of control rather than in control. So that's what the researchers tells us we might be guilty of sometimes, perhaps when we're busy. But the researchers also help us. They help us be structured, and they tell us that we can listen carefully, and we can be structured and organized in the way that we listen. And if we do that, then there are good consequences for the patients. So what are the skills that the researchers hint at that might help our communication? First of all, it says don't make assumptions. Don't try and guess what people are worried about. And this may be why students are cleaner, better listeners than very experienced staff. Students don't have any advice to give, they just listen. Whereas experienced staff have so much advice shouting in their ears that they get in the way of properly listening. And so don't guess, no matter how experienced you are, and remember to ask. Remember that people don't always tell you what their main concerns are. They don't tell you all of their concerns straight away. And therefore, you should listen out for hidden concerns. They'll only tell you those hidden concerns if you say, is there something else that you're worried about? And also listen out for the concerns that you can't fix. Many of the people that we support have unfixable problems, but it's still helpful for them to describe those concerns and have those worries and problems listened to. So listen out for hidden concerns, and listen out for the concerns that nobody can do anything about. Then it also says hold back with the advice. Listen to all the concerns and hold back with your advice. And it suggests that actually, even sort of slightly strange to realize this, but the researchers suggest that if we use structures in our conversations, in our listening conversations, that people are more clearly listened to, feel more able to express themselves, and more able to think clearly. So a structure is helpful. Remember this also, the researchers say that people have their own ideas about what would help, and they have their own ideas about who would support them. So just because we're in front of someone who's upset doesn't mean that we have to be the person that provides the emotional support to them. We're just in front of them now, but they're most likely to have family or friends or people in their lives who provide the support and the strength they need to cope with serious illness or even minor illness. Most people have somebody. Of course, not everybody does, but most people have someone. And here's another interesting thing that came from the research. Most people have a pretty good idea in their own minds about what would help. And so we can trust them to know what they're worried about, and trust them to have an idea about what would help. The consequences of careful listening are that actually people feel more involved, better listened to, and more respected. And so if we can listen carefully, people will have a sense of control, be clearer thinking, and perhaps more able to cope. Now, of course, we're all busy people, and therefore time is a constant worry for us. And doing something like listening to an unpredictable conversation is something that we might be nervous of attributing time to. But we're going to show you that actually in a video in this workshop, you can provide this kind of support in only 6 minutes, maybe even less. And if you use a structure and you're efficient in the way that you listen, that you can listen quite quickly to what it is that people are worried about. So now I'm going to show you how to do it, step by step by step. I want you to notice the pattern to listening. The researchers have helped us with this. There's a pattern to how you listen that makes you a more effective listener. It's about taking turns, listening to them, asking them again, reflecting what it is that you've heard. Let me show you. First of all, you should ask about people's concerns. And when they start to tell you what they're worried about, you repeat back what you've heard to prove that you've heard it. We call that reflecting. So you ask a question about concerns, they tell you, you say, okay, so you're worried about this and you're worried about that. And then you say, are there other things that you're worried about? Or is there something else that you're worried about? And one study said that if you use the phrase, is there something else, you get more concerns than if you say, is there anything else? Maybe just the way you say it, or maybe the language perhaps. But we're suggesting to you that you don't just ask about the first concerns, you ask about more. And when they give you more concerns, you repeat those back as well. In other words, you reflect back. And you keep on doing that until they run out of things and they say, no, those are the main things I'm worried about. Then you summarize and you'll have a clear idea of what it is that they're worried about. So can you see there's a pattern to asking and repeating back and asking and repeating back and then summarizing. So if you do that, you'll end up with a list of concerns. And I'm going to suggest to you that you consider actually making a written list. And you list the things that they said that they were worried about. There are 3 lists in this structure. Find out a list of their concerns, find out a list of the people they have that support them, and find another list of the ideas they have about the things that they think would help. 3 separate lists. So here's the SAGE and THYME structure. Of course, SAGE is just a mnemonic. It just means S-A-G-E, and each of the letters of SAGE stands for something. And the first letter is S for setting. If you notice that someone's upset, think first about the setting. Is the setting right for you? You might be in the middle of something. You might need to come back to this person and say, I saw earlier that you were upset and I was busy at the time, but I've come back to just check whether you would like to talk or not. Of course, the setting has to be right for them as well. So have they got some privacy? Do you need to pull the curtains down? Do you need a quiet room? Is there somewhere you can go that can allow them to feel free enough and secure enough to be able to tell you what it is that they're feeling emotional about? That's the S of SAGE. Think first about the setting. Then, because unless you ask, you can't know what people are worried about, the A of SAGE is simply that. Ask. Ask them what they're worried about. And they will start to tell you. If they want to tell you, they'll start to tell you. The G of SAGE is to gather all of the concerns. So I've just been explaining. You ask about a concern, you repeat back what you hear, and then you say, is there something else? And it goes round in a cycle like that. Let me give you an example. You say to someone, you seem upset. Would you like to tell me what it is that you're worried about? And they say, yeah, I'm just not myself. The doctors came around on the ward round really early this morning, and they explained something about the scan results that they didn't seem really very comfortable with, and I didn't really remember very well. And they said they said something about another scan. So I'm a bit okay. So what I'm hearing is that the doctor said something about a scan, and you don't quite remember what it was that they said about the results. And they also mentioned there was going to be another scan. So the first scan and the second scan. Is there something else that you're worried about? Yeah, I'm thinking about it all the time because my sister's coming in at 2 o'clock, and she's a nurse, and she's going to want to know what the scan results were and why they're sending me for another scan. And I don't know what I'm going to say to her because I can't remember it. It's just a blur to me. Okay, so as well as worrying about those 2 scans, you're worried about your sister coming in at 2 o'clock as well. Is there something else that you're worried about? Yeah, it's a bit scary. I'm a bit unsettled. I thought it was all going to be straightforward, and now it's beginning to feel as though it's not all going to be straightforward. Okay, so I'm hearing the 2 scans, the one you've had, the one you need. I'm hearing about your sister, and I'm hearing that you're feeling scared. That's a lot. I'm hearing that, but just let me check. Is there something else that you're worried about? No, those are the things that are going through my head. Okay, so then I know I finished the G of SAGE. By that stage, I will have a few things written down on a piece of paper. I will have scan 1, scan 2, sister at 2, and feeling scared about the future. I'll have those 4 things written down on a piece of paper, and I'll be able to say something empathic. So the E of SAGE is empathy. And I'll say something that proves that I've noticed the distress, and say something like, I can now see, I can now understand, or thanks for explaining that. I can now see why it is that you're not yourself this morning. You've a lot to cope with today. That's a lot going through your head. So that's SAGE. That's how to get into these kind of conversations. And And by the time you finish SAGE, you know what the person's worried about. If you like, you've opened the can of worms. Now I'm going to talk to you about time. Remember the slide earlier was saying that most people have people that support them. The T and the H of time are about just asking about the people that support them. So the T is, who have you got to support you? You might say, so you mentioned your sister. Apart from your sister, who else is it that supports you? And they might say, yeah, I have a daughter, or I have a husband, or I have a friend who's, so you make another list, daughter, husband, partner, friend, make another list of the people that they've got to support them. And you keep on doing that in the same way. You ask a question, they give you something, you repeat it back, and you say, can I just check, is there someone else that supports you? You keep on going until you feel as though you have a full list. And then the H of time is linked to the T of time. And you say, so how do those people help? How does your sister help? How does your mom help? How does your daughter help? You know, whoever it is you've got on that list, you would then say to them, so how is that working? How do those people help? The T and the H is about the support. The Y of time is about the things that they think would help. So it's the you question. What do you think would help? Or you could say it in just 3 words. What would help? And it links to the concerns in the G. And so you might say, so you talked about the scan results that you sort of know the doctors weren't straightforward, from what the doctor said weren't straightforward, and you know there's going to be another scan coming, and you've got a sister coming later on, and you're feeling unsettled and you're feeling scared. What do you think would help? And they pause then, and they start thinking about the things that would help. And they start telling you, well, it would help, I think, if before my sister comes, I knew which scan I've had, what the results were, and why that means I need another scan, and what other kind of scan. Okay, so you're telling me you need to know much more about the scan you've had and the scan that you're going to have before your sister comes at 2 o'clock. I hear that. What else would help? Well, it would help if, I think it might help if somebody's around at 2 o'clock when my sister comes. I think she's going to be a bit shocked that they want more scans. And so if somebody else, maybe one of the doctors or maybe you, could be around at 2 o'clock, that might help as well. Okay, I'm hearing that. I'm hearing about needing to understand the scans and someone being around at 2 o'clock. What else might help? What else might help you feel less scared? Well, I suppose I don't know how scared to be just yet. I need to get the facts before I know how scared to be. Okay. So understanding what's going on, having someone around at 2 o'clock might actually be the first step in helping you feel less scared. I hear that. And then we move on to the M of time. And the M of time is where you simply say, and is there something you want me to do? So you might be the pharmacist or the ward clerk or the healthcare assistant or the doctor or the district nurse. You might say, and is there something you would like me to do? And they might say, yeah, I want you to perhaps get the doctor, or I'd like you to find out from the doctor what the scan was and what the results were and what the next scan is all about, why they're sending me on. Okay, I'm hearing that, and I can do those things, find out from the doctor and find out about the scans. And then they might run out of things that they can think of that you want to do, but you might have some suggestions. You might say, well, I can be around later on, and I think that perhaps later on when your sister comes, maybe we should find somewhere private. We have a little sort of relative room down the ward. Maybe you'd like to come and I'll arrange that's empty at 2 o'clock. And when your sister comes, we'll have the information. I'll be with you and we'll go into that room. So can you see that there's like 2 parts to the M of time? The things that they think that they would like you to do and the things that you can think of that might also be helpful. And then the final part of the model is E. The final E of time is about ending. And essentially a summary goes on here. And it's a way of bringing it to a close. And the people who are upset understand that what's going on here is that you're bringing it to a close. You summarize the concerns, you summarize the support, and you summarize the plan. And you explain what it is you're going to do, and you say to them, is it all right if we leave this discussion here for now? And I'll come back when I have more information about the scans, and I'll come back at 2 o'clock again later on. And that's a way of ending the conversation. So it's about a summary and it's about asking for a closure. So that's a structure we'd like you to consider. We'd like you to think that listening actually involves proactively asking people stuff. And that involves some self-control. It involves you holding back with the things that you might want to say, holding back with wanting to tell your own story or things that they're saying that might remind you of other situations, holding back with the advice that you might feel you might be able to give. And you of course can give advice, but you can see that the advice is right close to the end of the structure. Listening is really actually about listening. It's about not expecting ourselves to have all of the answers, but listening to their concerns, their support, and their ideas. And the last slide in this section of the workshop is just, if you like, a caution slide. You will come across sometimes people who have ideas of self-harm. They might have really complex relationship issues, or they might have what we call safeguarding issues where their safety or the safety of others is at risk. And we just want you to notice yourself when you're feeling out of your depth. And if you're out of your depth and it really needs to be, what you're hearing is stuff that needs to be dealt with by someone who's been trained to deal with those issues of safeguarding or self-harm, we just want you to notice that and then say something like this. I can see you've got a lot of strong feelings about this. I wonder if I might be able to ask one of my colleagues to come and talk those things through with you. So, in summary, we need to notice the people who are worried. We need, if we can, to make the time for people who are worried. And with careful skills and with a structure, we might be able to use our time carefully and sensitively support the people who are worried in our care. I want you to have a think about all of that. We're going to give you the evidence in a pack now, and I want you to go back into the same 3 groups, and in that group do 2 things. First of all, say, so does any of that apply to my work? Does any of that SAGE and THYME structure make sense to me personally? How might I think about using elements of that structure in my work, in the way I support people? And then the second question is about asking about looking back at what you did in the first group work session to see how much of these skills and of this structure you were discussing in the first session. Please, if you would go into those groups now. So this is the slide that we would then have on after during the rehearsals, and then after the rehearsals, we would then put this slide on and then explain to people that what we want them to do is to go back into the small groups, try to discourage them from taking the evaluation forms out too quickly, but to go around the group so that they can say for themselves something they're taking away from the workshop and the other learners can hear what it is that each of them are learning from the workshop.